Imagine it's a cold January night in a remote Italian monastery. A frail friar, known for the bleeding wounds on his hands, suddenly stops his work. He turns to his brothers with an urgency they've never seen before. "We must pray," he tells them. "Pray for a soul that is about to appear before God. Pray for a king." The other monks are confused. What king? There's no news of any royal illness, but they obey. 1,000 miles away, in a lavish English estate, the most powerful monarch on earth is taking his final breaths. The friar's name was Padre Pio. The king's was George V, and neither man had ever met. How did one know the other was dying at that exact moment? This isn't just a story of faith. It's a historical event that defies all logical explanation. To understand how unbelievable this is, you have to picture their two worlds. They couldn't be more different. In southern Italy, you have Francesco Forgione, known as Padre Pio, a Capuchin friar living a life of poverty, prayer, and penance. He was already a controversial figure, famous for bearing the stigmata, the wounds of Christ. To thousands, he was a living saint. To the Vatican itself, he was a source of suspicion, often investigated and silenced. His world was one of stone cells, incense, and the quiet devotion of peasants. Then, across the continent, you have George V, King of the United Kingdom and the British Dominions, Emperor of India, a man who commanded a quarter of the world's population. His world was Sandringham House, Buckingham Palace, global politics, and immense, unimaginable wealth. One man's power was spiritual and unseen. The other's was material and absolute. They existed in completely separate realities, with no reason for their paths, or their fates, to ever cross. If you're fascinated by mysteries that science can't touch, make sure you're subscribed, because this story only gets stranger. By mid-January 1936, it was no secret that the 69-year-old king was unwell. He was at his beloved Sandringham House in Norfolk, suffering from a severe bronchial illness. The public was told it was just a cold, but the inner circle knew the truth. His health had been fragile for years, a consequence of heavy smoking and injuries sustained during World War I. The bulletins released by the palace were carefully worded, designed to inform without causing a panic. The king's life is moving peacefully towards its close. One famous notice read, "The royal physicians, led by Lord Dawson of Penn, were in constant attendance." The family gathered. The Prince of Wales, soon to be King Edward VIII, rushed to his father's bedside. An entire empire held its breath. The news was available. Yes. Anyone with a radio or a newspaper in London or Paris knew the king was gravely ill. But in a remote Italian monastery, with limited access to international news, the details were scarce, and nobody, not even the king's own doctors, knew the exact moment he would pass. Back in San Giovanni Rotondo, the evening of January 20th began like any other. The friars followed their strict routine of prayer and work. It was during this time that Padre Pio made his startling announcement. Accounts from his fellow friars, like Father Alessio Parente, detail the event clearly. He didn't just say, "Let's pray for a dying man." He was specific. He told them to pray for a king. He gathered them together, initiating an intense prayer vigil. The monks, trusting their spiritual father, did as he asked, even without understanding why. Think about the scene. There's no television, no breaking news alerts on a phone. Just the chilling words of a man they believed had a direct line to the divine. They were praying into the unknown, guided only by his conviction. What must they have been thinking? Was it the King of Italy? A monarch from a neighboring Catholic country? The idea that they were praying for the head of the Church of England, a Protestant king, would have been the furthest thing from their minds. At 11:55 p.m. on January 20th, 1936, at Sandringham House, King George V died. We now know his death was hastened by his physician, Lord Dawson, who administered a fatal dose of morphine and cocaine. He did this to ensure the death occurred in time to be announced in the morning edition of the Times newspaper, rather than the less appropriate evening journals. As the king's life ended in England, the prayers in Italy reached their peak. According to the testimonies, it was right around this time that Padre Pio concluded the vigil. He turned to his brothers and told them their prayers had been answered. The soul had departed. The task was done. It wasn't until the next day, or even later, that the slow-moving news of the outside world finally reached the monastery. A newspaper arrived, or a visitor brought the information, and the friars were stunned. The king they had been praying for, at that exact time, was the King of England. A man over 1,000 miles away, separated by geography, culture, and religion, was the subject of their mysterious, urgent vigil. Now, the skeptic will immediately raise their hand, and they have a valid point. The king's illness was public knowledge. It wasn't a secret that he was dying. Couldn't Padre Pio have simply heard the news and, knowing the end was near, made an educated guess? It's a plausible argument. He could have seen an old newspaper and assumed the worst. He could have been making a general prayer for a public figure. But this explanation starts to fray when you look at the specifics. It's the Times timing asterisk. He didn't just say, "The king is ill." He allegedly initiated the prayers at the very point the king was entering his final moments, and concluded them when he died. It's the Times specificity asterisk. He said, "A king focusing the spiritual energy of his community on one person." And it's the Times distance asterisk. Information simply didn't travel that fast. In 1936, there was no live feed from the royal deathbed. For the timing to be a sheer coincidence is statistically possible, but it strains credulity. To understand how his followers believe this was possible, you have to know about another miracle attributed to Padre Pio: bilocation. This is the alleged ability to be in two places at once. It sounds like something out of science fiction, but it's a phenomenon documented in the lives of numerous saints, including Saint Anthony of Padua and Saint Alphonsus Liguori. In Padre Pio's case, the stories are plentiful. There are sworn testimonies from people who claim he appeared to them, spoke with them, and even physically interacted with them, all while he was verifiably back in his monastery, seen by dozens of other people. An Italian officer claimed Pio appeared to him in a dream and stopped him from taking his own life. A bishop claimed Pio appeared in his office in Uruguay. Could this explain the connection to the king? Was it possible that Padre Pio was not just knowing from a distance, but was somehow spiritually present at the king's side in his final moments? It's a staggering thought, one that pushes the boundaries of our understanding of consciousness and reality itself. This story doesn't just come from folklore. It's part of the vast collection of testimonies gathered during the beatification and canonization process for Padre Pio. For a person to be declared a saint in the Catholic Church, the Vatican conducts an exhaustive and often adversarial investigation into their life. Every claim, every alleged miracle, is scrutinized by theologians and experts, including a figure historically known as the Devil's Advocate, whose job is to disprove the claims. The accounts of the friars who were present that night were recorded and entered into this formal process. They gave sworn statements. These were not men seeking fame. They were humble monks living a secluded life. Their testimony, along with thousands of others detailing healings, prophecies, and other supernatural events, was deemed credible enough by the Church. In 2002, Pope John Paul II officially canonized Padre Pio, declaring him a saint. While the Church doesn't require belief in any specific private miracle, the fact that this story is part of the official record gives it a weight that urban legends simply don't have. But one question remains: why King George V? Why would a devoutly Catholic friar who believed the Pope was Christ's vicar on earth be so concerned with the soul of a Protestant monarch, the formal head of a rival church? The answer may lie in Padre Pio's core mission. He saw himself as a spiritual shepherd, and he believed every soul was precious to God, regardless of their title or denomination. He often spoke of his desire to empty purgatory. Perhaps he saw a soul in great spiritual need. While George V was a man of duty, his personal piety was not deeply profound. He was head of the church, but that was a role he inherited. For Padre Pio, the final moments of life were the most critical, a chance for any soul to turn towards God. The prayer vigil may not have been about showing off a supernatural ability. It may have been a spiritual intervention, a final plea for a man he'd never met but saw as a brother in humanity, a powerful king who was prepared, in the end, just as vulnerable as any other person facing eternity. So what is the undeniable proof of Padre Pio's divine connection? For many, it's not one single thing. It's the convergence of impossible facts. The timing, precise to the minute. The distance, spanning a continent. The specificity of the prayer for a king. The context of a man whose life was already filled with inexplicable phenomena like the stigmata and bilocation, and the credibility of the witnesses who recorded it for history. Science demands repeatable experiments, and a miracle, by its very nature, is a singular event that breaks the laws of nature. It cannot be repeated in a lab. Therefore, science can never prove it. But history and testimony can present a case. This event is a piece of that case, a historical data point that simply doesn't fit into our neat, materialist view of the world. It's a chilling, awe-inspiring story that forces us to confront the possibility that there are connections between us that transcend space, time, and even life itself. A humble friar in a remote village, and a powerful king in his palace, linked for a moment at the threshold of death. Whether you see this as a profound miracle, a stunning coincidence, or a cleverly told legend, the story of Padre Pio and King George V endures for a reason. It challenges our perception of what is possible. I want to know what you think. What's your explanation for what happened that night? Is this undeniable proof of something beyond our world? Or is there a rational explanation we're missing? Let me know your theory in the comments below. Thanks for watching.